Hi everybody, welcome back to Ag Class. Last week we talked about how much land was actually available for agriculture. As you remember, we did our little pie chart and we broke down the percentages of land that was not able to be used. For example, places that were too hot, too cold, like deserts or like Arctic tundras. We talked about how there's not a lot of agriculture land available in very suburban areas. And then we talked about because we have very little land available for agriculture, how it's important to practice good soil conservation techniques and to be very aware of how much soil is eroding in your operation, and then just keep in mind how much that's really costing you in the long run. This week, we're going to talk a little bit about plant nutrient deficiencies. We're going to talk about macronutrients. We're going to talk about micronutrients. And we're going to kind of look at plants and people, kind of how they are similar and how they differ. And I'm really excited because I think this is an interesting lesson. So let's begin. It's a very note-heavy lesson, so I'm going to be predominantly writing on the board, so you might not see my face the whole time. But here we go. Let's think about some similarities and some differences between plants and people. So I'm going to draw a Venn diagram, and I'm going to put up some things that are similar and some things are different. Make sure I don't lose my board here. So we're going to do plants. We're going to do people. Okay, well, what makes this go? People need blood to live. We'll put that over here. We'll put people have blood. What would be the equivalent for a plant? Plants have sap. I would say people are predominantly consumers. While plants are predominantly producers. Well, let's think of some things that we have in common. Both plants and people, as you know, we need food, air, water, and certain nutrients to live. There are two types of nutrients that we need to live. We have macronutrients and we have micronutrients. Our macronutrients are nutrients that need to be present in a relatively large amount to support the health of the organism. And then our micronutrients, which is the opposite of macro, are required in relatively small amounts to promote the health of the organism. So we're going to talk now about three of the most important macronutrients that we see that are needed for plants, and also we're going to talk a little bit about fertilizers, because when you look at a fertilizer bag, it shows you certain nutrients that you need to add to the soil to promote growth in your plants. And one of the three of the most important are potassium, phosphorus, nitrogen, and potassium. So we're going to talk a little bit about nitrogen first. Nitrogen is the builder, and it's important for both plants and people. We both need nitrogen. Okay, nitrogen. And when you see nitrogen on the periodic table, it will be denoted as an N, just an N. Nitrogen is a primary building block for all organisms. It's a component of every amino acid and that makes it essential for making proteins. As part of chlorophyll in plants, nitrogen helps keep the plants green. So nitrogen, along with magnesium, is the only element in the chlorophyll molecule that the plant obtains from the soil. So nitrogen is very important for plant growth. And it's also relatively, when you see fertilizer bags, you'll have 3 different numbers. So for example, we'll keep it simple, 3, 2, 1. Well, usually this first number here is going to be your nitrogen. Then you're going to have your phosphorus, and then you're going to have your potassium. So now we're going to talk a little bit about phosphorus. And phosphorus is the energy supplier for the plant. Phosphorus is found in every living cell. It serves as both a structural element and as a catalyst for biochemical reactions. Phosphorus is a component of DNA and ATP, which is the cell's energy molecule, and it also plays vital roles in capturing light during photosynthesis. That helps with seed germination and helps plants use their water efficiently. Plants also use phosphorus to help fight external stress and prevent disease. Now we're going to talk a little bit about potassium. Also, phosphorus is denoted by a P. I failed to mention that on the periodic table of elements. So we're going to talk about potassium, the regulator. And potassium is denoted by a K on the periodic table of elements. Potassium is essential to the workings of every living cell. It plays an important role in water balance by regulating the opening and closing of stomates, which if you remember from a little bit from our plant lecture, the stomates are the pores in the leaves that allow the exchange of gas. So that's an important part that potassium plays. And those are the 3 macronutrients for plants. Those are what is required in the highest amount. So what do we need to do to meet a crop's needs if they happen to be deficient in one of these nutrients? Well, fertilizers can be applied. What are the different ways that we can apply fertilizer? We can apply them as liquids or in solids. I know you've heard about anhydrous ammonia. It's a pressurized gas that's injected into the soil. You can do bagged fertilizers, and they're sold in a variety of stores. And as we said before, we talked about how the 3 macronutrients are shown on the bag. So nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium is listed on the fertilizer's NPK ratio. So for example, before I drew a bag, I'm going to draw another bag just to make it a little bit more clear. A bag of fertilizer. So say we have a 5, 10, 15 bag of fertilizer. That means that the fertilizer contains 5% nitrogen, 10% phosphorus, and 15% potassium. Some fertilizers do contain micronutrients, which are the nutrients that are required in a relatively small amount for plant health and growth, and they indicate the amounts of micronutrients that they have in there. But most of the time, people are really concerned about nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium if their plants are showing signs of a deficiency, such as yellowing leaves or stunted growth or a lot of withering around the base of the plant. And it's important to know when applying fertilizer to keep these 4 things in mind. So we've determined that our plant is deficient in something. They need a macronutrient. What do we need to do to apply it to our crop? Well, we need to have the right source. This means that we must have the right type of fertilizer. The right fertilizer that matches the needs of our crop is what we need to fulfill the deficiency and to get that regulated and get that plant healthy and growing good again. We have to keep in mind we need to apply it at the right rate. It's very important to apply fertilizer at a rate that the plant can use. If the rate is too low, then optimal yields will not result. If the fertilizer is too high, it's wasted, the plant can't use that much, and typically it leaks into the environment. We also need to keep in mind the right time to apply fertilizer. We got to find the time when the crop needs the nutrients. And typically that will just take somebody looking at it, realizing what's wrong with it, recognizing that its leaves may be yellowed and withered, or that it's not growing as good as last year's, it's stunted, it's smaller. So it just takes a little observation to get the ball rolling and to kind of know what your crop needs. So once you recognize that a need is there, that's when you can take your correct soil sample, you can send it off, get your results, and see what nutrient that your plant is lacking, and then that will help you decide what fertilizer to use, and that will get your plant up and growing. The last one to keep in mind when applying fertilizer to your crop is the right place. Farmers must make sure that nutrients are applied where the plant roots can most easily access them. Careful application limits the loss of the nutrients. And typically, fertilizer is expensive, so you don't want to waste any of your product. You want to make sure that it's going toward what you want it to go for and that it's going to end up improving your yield. So when you're applying, you need to avoid sensitive areas, such as those close to waters, so that fertilizer won't leak off into the waterways. And I think we have pretty much covered what I wanted to cover this week. We were going to get into organic versus commercial fertilizers, but I think I will save that for next week because it's pretty interesting to know the differences between the two. And then you can make your choice what you would use in your operation after being presented the facts of the pros and cons of each one. So I want to save that for a later date so that we can really get into it and figure out what we would pick if we were running a farming operation. Would we use organic or commercial fertilizer? So since we've went over a lot today, I do want to give us a little quiz to make sure that we understand what we talked about. I'm going to make it 3 questions. So if you will get out a piece of paper with a pencil and you'll write down 1, 2, and 3 for me. The first question is, what is a macronutrient? The second question is, what is a micronutrient? And for the third question, I want you to let me know the 3 macronutrients that we talked about today. I want you to pick one of those nutrients, and I want you to tell me a little bit more about it in a paragraph. So I'm excited for next week so that we can dive on into organic and commercial fertilizers. I hope that you learned a lot today about macro and micronutrients and different deficiencies in plants. Thank you. I will see you guys next week.